Hi, welcome to Fish. First I see Kim, and my name is Linda. So, I want to discuss a conversation I had, and then I wrote something about it. So I'm going to read it to you, so bear with me, but it's kind of an interesting subject. It's one of the faults atheists find with God. And apparently some professing Christians share this thinking, is that he, meaning God, shows himself in the Old Testament to be, wrathful. Now, the first conversation I had with someone about this subject made me think we simply were not defining wrathful the same way. I believed, meant that God was quick to anger, right? That he flew off the handle easily, and that he was capricious about when and why he lost it. Now, I knew he wasn't any of that, but apparently I was wrong about her definition. She meant that God was wrong for punishing the unrighteous. Now, there are indeed those in the world who think God errs because he judges sin. His wrath, then, isn't acceptable in any form. There simply isn't room for a God who doesn't bend his will toward making life better for the universe. And only if he did so, in this view, would it be a benevolent God. Yes, he would. He would be a benevolent God. And clearly, these thinkers say the God of the Old Testament is not benevolent. Well, I guess I could agree with this, the God of the Old Testament, who happens to be the same as the God of the New Testament, and is not benevolent by those standards either. All right, so you go in the dictionary. The Oxford English Dictionary defines benevolent as well-meaning and kindly. And C.S. Lewis reminds us that God is good, not simply well-meaning and kindly. Look, God does not mean well in the sense that he's hoping for the best and trying to help and aiming for what's good. No, God is good. He does good, and he brings about good. But guess what? Good is defined on his terms. Now, look, I could say, for instance, I write this book, right? I'm not going to write a book, but just say I wrote a book. It's like this amazing book, because we're going to go there, and it's going to sell for like $1 gazillion. Now, my understanding of good is limited and finite, right? It's just how it is. I'm not God, and I'm limited and finite. I'm a sinner. And I don't know if $1 gazillion will make me happy or angry at people who I might perceive trying to leech off me or, try to change my perspective so much that I stop doing of things of value, right? Like stop videotaping or, preaching and ministering and all that. And I don't know if $1 gazillion would make me, more prideful or self-centered or egotistical, right? Or, am I going to lose all my friends or gain more friends? Those friends. And most importantly, I don't know if $1 gazillion would become, guess what, my idol, right? I write this book, I get $1 gazillion. Is that money going to be my idol now? I mean, would I worship that money in God's place? So, God knows these things, and he may, for my benefit, right, and yours too, here and now in this life, prevent me from getting $1 gazillion from my pretend book. And I have no doubt that God could give me $1 gazillion if it were truly for my good, if it would bring me closer to him, if it would, make me conform more closely to the image of his son. And what's $1 gazillion anyway to the owner and creator of the cosmos, right? So he withholds, let's think on this. God withholds what would harm his people in the same way that a good parent doesn't give a 3-year-old candy for breakfast just because she asked for it, right? God knows better than we do and what is truly good. God is good. God himself is good. So we can conclude that his judgment is good as well. And when he says the wages of sin is death, that's not an arbitrary judgment. That's the testimony of an all-knowing creator. Much the same way, right? Much the same way that a policeman, right? We could just think of a policeman that might point to a sign and say, this is a handicapped parking zone. You'll get a ticket if you park here. And God has made plain what disobeying his righteousness standards would cost. You following me on this? Someone who didn't know what the handicapped parking sign meant would be grateful that the policeman told him. They'd be like, oh, thanks, I didn't know that. Great. They wouldn't rail against him just because he, didn't tear the sign down and let them park in that specially marked spot, right? I mean, they certainly would ignore the warning and park there right under the watchful eye of the policeman now, would they? But that's what many people want of God. You see the comparison? This is what people want of God, that he would ignore justice just for them. Now, of course, few want him to ignore justice for those they consider enemies, but they reserve their idea of his benevolence based on how he treats them. Okay. All right. So Jesus told an interesting story about a man who thought much as these people do. He owed a debt so great he could never pay it back in his lifetime. The equivalent would be like millions of dollars today. And his creditors said all the man owed would have to be sold, and he himself would go into servitude until he paid his debt. So everything that this guy owns is going to be sold off, and then he's going to be like an indentured servant. Well, the man begged for more time. The creditor had compassion on him, but instead of giving him more time to pay, which was really an impossibility, right? The sum was so great, this guy could never pay it off in a lifetime. He forgave him the entire debt. He wrote it off to the last penny. The man left and immediately ran into a fellow worker who owed him the equivalent of about $10,000. So, just reminding, the guy who was just forgiven the debt was millions of dollars, like hundreds of millions of dollars. Now he runs into this other guy who owes him the equivalent of about $10,000 today. The man grabbed his co-worker, the $10,000 guy, and demanded that he pay up or he have to sell everything he owned and go into servitude himself until the debt was paid. The co-worker begged for more time, but the man said, he refused. And a bunch of other workers saw what happened and told the man's creditor, right? They went over and said, hey, this is how the story ends. Then his master summoned him and said to him, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. And should not you have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you? And in anger his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. Matthew 18:32-34. So, was the creditor in the wrong because he didn't treat the man in a benevolent way? Of course not. He had in fact canceled the man's debt. It was the man himself who wasn't benevolent, who didn't understand what receiving a gift of forgiveness actually meant. So, no, God is not benevolent in the way of the people of today that they want him to be, right? He's not benevolent in the way the people of today want him to be. He doesn't tear up the ticket we deserve. Rather, he paid it for us. The point isn't to get us off so we can go pile up more debt. The point is to change our status from debtor to a child of God. It is to give us an inheritance far richer than we can imagine. God is good. Well, that's it for fish. First I see Kim. My name is Linda. And until next time.